and they have a lot of resources for church planners, articles, and I love their vision. They're just wanting to see gospel-based churches started.
Welcome to David Sneed Ukraine Missions, a Calvary Chapel podcast based out of Lviv, Ukraine. Hi everyone, my name is David Sneed. I'm a missionary in Lviv, Ukraine, and today we're talking with George Markey. How are you doing, brother?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Glad to be here.
Great to hear. I'm really glad to have you again. George is a good friend in Kiev, Ukraine, or Kyiv is the proper way to say it. He's been a missionary there for a while. And I also had him and his wife on about a week or two ago where they talked about missionary parenting. Today we're talking about church planting in particular, church planting. So I want to kick off like right off the bat and ask you, George, why do we need more churches?
Well, that's a great question. I think it's always good to start out with why, because there can be the wrong reasons, and oh, we've always done it, or or it's unfortunately it can be something that to justify our own existence, right? That I'm a church planner or whatever. But really to think through why we're doing it, and I think, of course, you need to go to the Bible and see what the Bible has to say about that. And if you look in the book of Acts, right? I mean, it was about starting churches, and and maybe you have to go back a little bit further too. Like, what is the church? And maybe we'll talk about that more today. Planning a church. Okay, well, what is a church? Is it a building? Is it what constitutes a church? But I guess for me, looking at what Jesus said, he said, the Great Commission, go into all the world. Go into all the world and make disciples of all nations.
Yeah.
So I think it's about the commission to disciple, and so I think churches are really the way you do that, right? You're forming a community of believers to best disciple them and to grow them up, because we're not Lone Ranger Christians, or we're forming each other. And so I think planning churches in communities, I think, provides the means, or I don't know, or the environment where people can come to Christ and then grow in Christ and help each other grow, and then go out and start other churches. So I think see it as a way of, I guess, two things, right? Reaching people. I think it's one of the best way to reach the world. And secondly, then it's a way to then disciple them.
Yeah, that makes sense. Sense. I would just want to give a little reminder for anybody that's watching. If you like what we do, if you like these interviews and stuff like that, please like this video. Please share, subscribe. Share it with your friends on social media. It's probably the best thing you can do. So you're in the middle of planting a church right now, right?
Yeah.
Just kind of starting, I think, if I remember correctly. Can you tell me what's the right way to say that in English? Etap, like level I guess,
phase.
or it's like, where are you in the process, and what does it look like now?
Yeah.
So, and this is your second church plant, right? Or would you count your dad's as your third church plant?
That's kind of to say, but I've actually been involved in 1, 2, 3. This will be kind of my fourth church plant I've been involved in.
Wow.
This is the second one I've actually been the leader in planting it, right? And yeah, we're pretty much in the beginning phases. We've been living. My family and I moved to this region. It's called Podil. It's in Kiev. This is the historic center of Kiev. So it's really a wonderful place, rich in history, and just been really enjoying it. But we've been here since let's see, almost. Yeah, we moved last November, I think it was, if I'm not mistaken. So it'll be coming up on a year. And at the time, I was still senior pastor of Calvary Chapel, Kiev Central. But recently I've turned that over so that I can focus more on church planting. So it's been a kind of a gradual process. We've gotten to know a lot of our neighbors and a lot of people around here, which has been our goal. The first phase is to really connect with people, understand the people here, And then also what's been exciting is we've been forming a team, and that's been going on for
Cool.
about 3 months, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of asked some people to come on, and we've been meeting bi-weekly, once a week to to kind of connect and go through some material. And then on Sundays we've been going out and actually backing up. We've been doing an English club for six months already,
Mm-hmm.
so that's been a way to connect. And now the team has been helping with that. And with the quarantine, kind of changed things. We've been out in a local park. And so the team has been coming. We've just been talking with people there, and
Mm-hmm.
so we're kind of in the beginning phases of I would say, connecting with the neighborhood, praying about what God would want us to do. And I'm actually slowly moving into discipleship. I have a guy I've been working with, discipling.
Cool.
And then the next step, we're going to launch a Bible study that would be open to anybody, believers, non-believers, but anybody who want to study the Bible with us. And
Mm-hmm.
we're getting that started. We haven't really had the first meeting yet, but we've been talking about it with people, and I think we'll have that going.
You said English club. Are there any people from your area that potentially people that you would want to invite to church that might also understand and watch this interview? Is that like a possibility? Like, just wondering.
That's a possibility, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's a rare thing for guests that I would talk to.
Mm-hmm.
Is that this podcast is all in English, and the people we minister are generally Central and Eastern Europe. So their main language would be some other language. But I think if you shared this podcast episode, it just might be interesting to see if anybody, hey, I saw you talking to this other missionary type thing. So just interesting.
Might do that. That'd be cool.
Yeah.
I mean, we've had some really good, it's been really neat to see. We've developed some close friendships with people already, and having had them over to our place. And I mean, they know we're Christians and know what we're doing, and got to share kind of our story, why we're here. And, so I mean, it's been really interesting doing that, just building relationships with people and getting to share with them what we're doing.
Now, did you guys move to that neighborhood thinking we're going to plant a church here, or did you guys move to that neighborhood and then think, hey, we should plant a church here? Does that make sense? Like the order of events. How did that work? Did you guys pick this area as like, this is strategic, whatever, like in the chess game of the Great Commission from the Lord?
Yeah, right.
Like, how did that work?
Well, it's a mix, although I'd say more this neighborhood chose us because my passion is church planting, and I've come to realize that more and more, and been trying to focus more on that. So I'm trying to figure out how much to tell the story, but we ended up in Kiev because we were coming to help a church that was, Calvary Chapel, that was kind of in trouble. Mm-hmm. But coming here, shortly after moving here, I realized, okay, I'm here not just for this. This is kind of just the part of it. Yeah. Really, we're here because Kiev needs churches. It might not seem that way, but it's huge, and there's just so many needs here. And so, thinking about that, I came to the conclusion, okay, we need to intentionally plant a church. It's not going to just happen by us trying to get the church in a place to do it. Although that was we're looking to do that, like do home groups and things. But we realized, okay, we need to kind of intentionally do this. Mm-hmm. So we actually selected a region, a neighborhood. It was where the church had originally come from. It was a neighborhood called Terimki.
Okay, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, and so we were like, okay, we're going to do Terimki, and we were telling people that, the church, hey, we're going to be starting a church.
I remember that, actually. I remember hearing that, yeah.
Yeah, we were living nearby, in a village, actually, nearby. And so we were saying, okay, well, we got to move there, So we began looking and making phone calls, and we have 6 kids, okay? And so I would tell people, would say, okay, well, who's moving in? I said, well, me and my wife and I and 6 kids. And they're like, not interested.
Yeah.
And hit the phone. So we just couldn't get that. And then this apartment was owned by missionaries, and they were selling it. And a missionary friend of ours was living here, and we had actually, the church had done a lot of ministry through this apartment. And then they were selling it, and we were praying, oh, maybe God would have us buy it, for the church.
Yeah. Of course.
And actually, this missionary friend of ours who was running it said, "Hey, have you and Sharon thought about moving here?" And he's like, "No, not really. I mean, I was, I just never thought of it."
Mm-hmm.
But then, long story short, we ended up renting this apartment. And it's now owned by friends of ours, and and then we realized, okay, God was kind of forcing us into this place. I mean, forcing us, in a good way. It's
Yeah.
like, okay,
Yeah.
we realized, okay, God wants us here, and began to make connections here. And it's like, wow, and it just things began to fall into place, and we realized, okay, this is where we need to be planting a church. So, to answer your question, we knew we were to plant a church or
Mm-hmm.
church, but I think God told us, no, not there, but here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. I was actually at a strategic, like, team building meeting with our church council on Saturday, and we talked about the aspect of how we live so far away from church.
Mm-hmm.
And it just kind of worked out that way. The apartment that was inherited to us is about an hour to an hour and a half away from church.
Mm-hmm.
And it really makes local ministry hard. Like, we feel the strain on even our relationships with the other church council members, not
Mm-hmm.
just with the like, much more so the church members. So we're praying about that. That's one of the reasons why we want to raise money to get a car, to make it easier to get over there. But yeah, I think being close to your ministry zone,
Yeah.
that's such an advantage. It gives you such
Oh,
an insight into people's lives and that kind of thing.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, praise the Lord. Do you have any? I think you and I have talked a bit about church planting resources in the past. I think it was a conversation you and I had maybe a year and a half ago. And I was wondering if you could share a couple things that maybe people would find useful for, like, an organization that is interested in church planting in Central and Eastern Europe, or some books that you found helpful or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's a lot out there. So I'll just share some things that have been helpful for me. I'm sure is not exhaustive, but kind of what got me started in considering church planting in Kiev was a book called Center Church by Tim Keller. Former pastor of Redeemer Church in
He's
Manhattan.
actually pastor emeritus.
Is
Like,
he?
yeah,
Oh,
so he's like still like involved, but
involved.
not
Yeah.
not the senior pastor. But keep going.
Right,
I'm
right,
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think if I understand correctly, so he can be more involved in kind of the city to city things, which is an outreach of Redeemer Church. It's their I don't want to say branch, right, that helps plant churches all over the world and provides resources and things. So yeah, Center Church by Tim Keller, just a wonderful book. It's pretty big, it's pretty thick, so it's not something you just peruse, but it's a great book, and you could even just take it chapter by chapter or look at things that would really resonate with you. But again, just a good book as maybe you're thinking about church planting
I agree.
or church planting. Then their organization, City to City, has a website. You can go to redeemercitytocity.com, and they have a lot of resources for church planners, articles, and I love their vision. Is they're it's of course Redeemer's a Presbyterian church, but
Mm-hmm.
they're just wanting to see gospel-based churches started, and so they're working with all sorts of denominations, Baptists, Pentecostals, other Presbyterians, just across the board.
Yeah.
But those that share that gospel-centered focus or the commitment to the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
So if they provide resources and money, I don't none of
Whoa,
I've
that's
heard of a church that'll help other churches who are not there from their denomination plant
yeah.
churches, and that's
Wow,
now
that's.
focus is urban center. Yeah, that's a great example to me, really.
Mm-hmm.
But it's urban centers they're targeting, which is one of them. And why is that? Because they feel, Tim Keller, again, you can he has that in his book, and you can even find him speaking on it. He has such a heart for cities. He feels like that's been underreached.
Mm-hmm.
And
Neglected in a way.
often,
Yeah.
yeah, neglected, yeah. and God loves cities, and he makes that case that God loves cities, and so because people are in those cities, there's the greatest concentration of humans, and God
Yeah.
loves humans. So, you know, so that really kind of got my attention because I was we had moved to plant a church in Ternopil, which is a smaller city, not small, 250,000, 300,000, but much smaller, and more people are nicer in some ways. And so I was like, oh, great, I'm out of Kiev, good riddance, But then we come back but God had been working on my heart, and Tim Keller was instrumental in that, just to kind of get my attention that, hey, this is a place I love because people are here, and it's strategic, because if you reach Kiev, you're going to reach all of Ukraine. There's people from all over the country, and then some will come here and go back, and you just, and it's a cultural center. I mean, we can go on about that. Like Paul was very similar in that way. He was very strategic minded. But anyway, so that's kind of the background of that book. It really got me thinking about it. So city to city, and also I ended up getting the privilege to go to New York for a 3-week intensive at their church for church planners from all over the world, and that was an amazing experience. Just be part of that intensive, and to meet other guys who are planning in Africa and South America, Australia, and so we keep in touch too and keep tabs on what's going on in each other's ministries. But and then after that, I was able to be part of something called an incubator, which is also a city-to-city thing. And actually, the intensive is a condensed version of that. So I ended up taking the incubator here in Kiev, which Pastor Ben Morrison, he's also a Calvary Chapel pastor, and another guy. They've been doing this course, running it, and so I'm on the end of that second year.
Mm-hmm. I'm hoping to have him on the podcast sometime.
Yeah, it'd be great. It'd be wonderful. He's now in charge of their incubator training in Europe. So anyway, it's also a great thing. If you're church planning, you really want to kind of focus on that. Then that's another thing that I would recommend looking into, and you can contact me on that. But it's they're starting up another round of the incubator. So get in on that, and it's what it is. It's 8 modules, 4 modules a year. So you can come together 4 times a year, but you have homework, and you have projects that you're doing. So you're kind of planning churches together, and then coming back and talking about it.
Sweet.
So you're going kind of step by step together, and that's been really great. Another resource. So that's Center Church, City to City. Then recently I read a book by Francis Chan called Letters to the Church. Maybe some of you know his book, Crazy Love. Well, he's kind of changed gears with church planning, or I think he's a church planner. Like he planted a mega church, but then ended up leaving that. And I think it was in a good way. He just felt like God was moving him on. They had some international kind of experience with church planting for a while, and came back and just realized they wanted to do more. I'll explain it, but something like cell churches. But yeah, it's kind of a smaller churches, but then these churches that multiply. And so he kind of moved over to that. And I would recommend, if you want to just listen to what he has to say. I really appreciated it, because I have to, or maybe I'll show my cards a bit, but I'm seeing more the advantages to that. You have a smaller, more kind of like what we see in the Book of Acts, these house churches. I want to be careful because I know there's just there's various approaches, but maybe I'll get a chance. I could share what I see good in that, and I even think that can help all church planners kind of just focus or just realize what is the church and what are we trying to do. Okay, so that's Letters to the Church, Francis Chan. Then before that, actually, I read there's a guy, Alan Hirsch, and he's kind of well known in one of the representatives of the missional incarnational approach to planning churches.
Okay.
He's known for his book called The Forgotten Ways, and I read another book by him before this. It was called The Shaping of Things to Come. And he co-authored it with a guy named Michael Frost, and it's actually a book that was recommended we were to read in my Western seminary studies. and it just kind of is just so resonated with me. And it was about, it's a book about really beginning to, question, or just rethink, not rethinking, but just kind of going back and thinking, what are we trying to do? What is the church, and how do we do it in our present culture? If I can sum it up really quickly, they critique kind of two approaches. Like there's the attractional approach in church planning, and there's we call the missional incarnational. Yeah, attractional is you start a church and you just try to get your goal is to get people into that church building or that come to your programs. Again, not necessarily bad, but it's all focused on maybe the Sunday morning, especially. So your goal is to kind of funnel people into that. That's the goal. And that's kind of, and they say that's worked because it's been, Christianity has been at the center of Western culture for a long time, but then it's no longer that way anymore. But when it was, and it made sense, kind of the church was the center of culture, of, all these different things. So you want to get people involved, get people into the church. Now the church is more on the outside, right? There's more of a hostility towards the church, and kind of looking at the church as irrelevant, Yeah, maybe not hostile even, but just kind of like, church, okay, whatever. It's not really for me. Yeah. Oh, great, it's for you, and all that. And so I think as we move into church planning, I'm really seeing we need to be kind of intentionally engaging the culture, and intentionally going out, because not expecting people to come to us or to be attracted to what we're doing, because and so kind of their idea is why is it called incarnational? It's because that's Jesus's model, right? He didn't say come to me, but he came to he became a man, he became like us, to look like he looked and acted like a Jew of that century, that time, in order to show God to us, and in order to draw.
Is that also why it's called missional, because of that kind of
kind of outward, going out, right? Yeah,
that makes sense.
So with their whole idea, it's not I don't think it's to say like that's wrong to do what you're doing, but let's just think about this, and I'd have to agree with them that whatever you say, kind of our approach to church planning has often become very one-sided, or just one model of mega church or big church. And no matter what size of church, I think it's affected our mindset all across the board. It's like you have this idea that you want to go to the church, yeah, you want to be effective, and that's a great. I think we should want that. We want to disciple people, but I think there's this pressure on pastors. I've felt it for sure that the church has to keep on growing and growing and growing. If it's not, then I'm doing something wrong. And our culture, is the same way. It's all about kind of numbers, and success is kind of measured in that. And so I think as a pastor, there's very few, I think, that have been successful doing that. And I thank God for them. Tim Keller is one of them. But for the most of us who don't have that really, I would say, gift to attract all those people, and build this, huge church, it's discouraging, because you kind of tell yourself, well, it's not about the numbers, but then you realize you feel like, well, I'm not really doing it, Well, I think we need to look to other, should be more varied in how we're approaching it. Maybe your approach more is like home church, or these smaller churches that then reproduce. I don't know, I'm getting ahead of myself, but these books have made me rethink that. How are we going to engage this culture we're in right now?
I think even with, I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off.
Go ahead, yeah.
I think even with Tim Keller's church, Redeemer, over in New York, I would still call them missional, in the sense that they are very engaging with the culture.
Yeah.
Planting different churches or satellite whatever locations that are very geared towards those neighborhoods and that kind of thing, and reading Center Church and listening to some seminars with Keller and Clowney and some other guys. They have really affected the way I preach, in how I prepare for kind of the cultural aspect of my sermon. Like I love getting in a taxi. This is one of the advantages to living across town, is I get in a taxi and I'll be in that taxi for 45 minutes to an hour.
Yeah.
And I can bounce sermon ideas off of the driver.
Awesome.
And I think that same thing in New York applies. Who's more talkative than a taxi driver? Well, maybe a barber. So those are my two places where I take it to the public forum and I say, what is Lviv? What is the organic, like, word on the street feeling on morality, the Bible, the church, Protestants, those kind of things. And even with this mega church feel, going back to Redeemer, where they have everybody coming into this location, they're still very engaged in the culture. And that's how I want to be missionally as a missionary when I'm preaching, regardless of which of these two models I'm doing. I want to be engaged. So yeah.
Actually, I'm not saying. Actually, he's mentioned Alan Harris mentions Tim Keller in his book, in a good way, because he looks to him as missional, right? And I would say the same thing. And actually, I appreciate that. I think there should be variety in how we're approaching things.
Yeah.
And there's different gifts. And it just depends on, what I'm trying to say is that, like, the issue, I think, is that because we view the large church as a success, they're the ones that are writing books. Right?
Yeah.
And they're the ones that are shown as this is the ideal. Okay. You know what I'm saying? So it's not like they're doing anything wrong. I think God is using them in their giftings. But the problem is when we think, okay, if I'm going to be successful, it has to look like that. Right?
Yeah. This is the goal. That's the mountaintop.
Yeah. People are starting the small churches don't really write the books, so you know what I'm saying? So I'm not saying those are wrong. It's just that we tend to measure ourselves with those books.
Yeah, totally.
Again, Tim Keller, man, what an example. And he's been really influential for me in their church. Actually, and they've made decisions, I think, to become more locally, to focus on their neighborhoods. Like they had a choice. They could become more of a mega church, or they could, but they chose to, as they were growing, we want to start with different locations because, and he said this, we want to be a good neighbor. We want to provide people opportunity to be neighbors to their neighbors, to be able to share the gospel where they are, not pull them out of their neighborhoods, which is, I guess, been my frustration. And that's why I've kind of come to this idea. Well, yeah, we need to plant local churches. I'm seeing this model of people coming from different regions, and you're pulling them out of their contexts. And church is about like meeting on Sunday in this place, and this, it might be a central location, but then there's no focus on reaching their neighborhoods. And actually, it's hard to, like, our example. So we're a church, but we have people from all over the city, and it can kind of become hard to even have a focus on who we're reaching.
Yeah.
Kiev? Well, that's huge.
Yeah.
Where are we going to then focus on? Well, I think it's, if you're living, one way to focus is, well, where am I living? Where's my circle of influence? And then you want to help the people, you want them to come together with like-minded people then to influence those people. Okay. And the second reason too is that with social media and just the pace of life, we have so many circles of, we call it circles of social circles, right? You have your school, your work, your, where you do your shop, just all these different circles you're running in, and then you have social media. That's another circle of friends, but because of that, I think we have the quality of relationships suffers. Like, we don't have those people that we just are really invested in, and we're like, we know what's going on in their lives. They know what's going on in our lives, and we're ready. And when they're having trouble or are having trouble, we're ready to help each other, right? We have a lot of acquaintances, but few really close friends, and the church then can add to that. Can add to another social circle, right? Yeah. Where I think if we're more locally based, then we're actually kind of allowing people to really invest in those social circles they're already in.
Yeah.
And so then I think then we're becoming more of an influence in society, because we're
Mm-hmm.
not like saying, okay, leave, you need to spend less time at your job so you can be involved in the church, or you need to be less involved in your school parent meetings because you need to be involved doing this in our church. Why
Mm-hmm.
not help those people in those circles? So, because that's where they're connecting with non-believers. That's where they can shine as
Yeah,
lights. Makes sense. Yeah. So
for sure.
that's
I
definitely,
think
I'm sold on.
if there were just a couple more people in this like area of town from my church, like one of the ways that I'm trying to be a light in my neighborhood right now is I haven't been going to the gym, uh, recently. So there's like a jungle gym, if that
Mhm.
makes sense, like outside where you can do pull-ups and dips and stuff like that. And so I'll go out there with the dog and I'll do a bunch of pull-ups and try to do some body weight exercises. And there's a couple of people that I've met there, but it's just me. Like if there was somebody out there with me, I feel like we could kind of feed off of each other,
Mhm.
and like kind of exponentially affect the people that gather at this place. That kind of thing. I think that our salt gets saltier when it's in the pile.
Yeah.
Or yeah, anyway, is that kind of what you mean, like
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's actually, there's a good podcast. I don't have the name of the podcast, unfortunately.
maybe the author or something like that?
I mean, I have the name of the podcast. I don't have the episode I listened to, but it's
Uh-huh.
called Strike the Match. I don't remember the name, the
One
author.
more time, what's the name of the
Strike the Match.
strike the match?
Okay, it's about missions, but there was one episode, and maybe I can put it in comments later. But my wife was listening to this podcast, and she had me listen to this episode, and it was about how about church planning, like, and how we kind of make it too complicated, and then so people think that, oh, it's not for me, it's for these special people that plant churches. Well,
Yeah.
it's not really rocket science, I think. But again, because of how complicated churches are, it's daunting. Like, you have to have a Sunday school, you have to have a worship team, you have to have all these different things.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you're actually don't have to, right? So what if you just, and his idea was very simple, but it's like, what if you just took 2 or 3 people from the neighborhood that are Christians, that I don't know, in your church, and you say, hey, let's just pray about this neighborhood. Let's pray that God, for each one of us, could maybe over the course of a year build relationships with 1, 2, 3 people, see them come to Christ, and begin to disciple them.
Yeah.
Just a few. Okay, we're just going to focus on that and just see what would happen. And I think, and I'm seeing that happen here. What we're doing, as we just, each one of us from our team are just kind of making these little connections, which is another advantage, by the way, like we were talking about. When you have different people, we have different strengths, different, and because of that, we appeal to different kinds of people. We're able to connect with different kinds of people. And I'm seeing that, like I'm connecting with certain people, my wife, my kids, then these members of our team, and we're just kind of making these connections. And of course, we're going to talk about God because he's part of our life, and we're going to, and we want to.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're finding out what we're doing. Anyway, so what if you just try that? If you're listening in and you're like, where do I start? Or we'll just take a couple people from your church and begin, that are in that neighborhood, to say, let's just pray for this neighborhood. Let's pray about God bringing in 1 or 2 people into each one of our lives. And then eventually, maybe starting a little Bible study, getting together. And I think we have a lot more churches that way.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Speaking of, you mentioned like having a Sunday school and a worship team and all of these things together. That all requires a team. I agree with you that in order to start a church, you don't have to have every single one of these things. In fact, I know several churches that their worship team is YouTube, and they like just put on a word video, from a couple of Christian songs. And that's how they do worship. But I don't think you even need to do that. Like, I don't think it's even required. But if you're gonna build a team, like, how have you guys been doing that? How do you start that?
Yeah. Well, can I just back up just on that
Yeah,
question
for sure. Yeah.
quick? That's what I've been thinking about a lot about too, as we began to start another church. I was thinking, what is the church? What makes a church a church? What are the
Yeah,
essential
let's do that.
ingredients? Do you have to have a worship team? You know, do you have to have a Sunday service? Yeah, okay, maybe
Mm-hmm.
that's not heretical, but actually, I think when I say that and people maybe even begin to like, what? I think it kind of shows us that we have these preconceived ideas. That
Yeah, yeah.
what if you don't have a Sunday service, then what are you doing? Um, well, maybe just go back to Acts and just look, even just the chapter 2. What was it about?
Mm.
Look at Peter preached this sermon, and people got they responded, and they began what they do? Started getting together, eat meals together. There's nothing about starting a Sunday school ministry, putting together a worship team, and again, I'm not against those things. I think those are great and everything, but it's not I don't think it's the essential part of a church. What is the essential part? Well, I would challenge you to just do a word study of ecclesia, right? The Greek word for church, and just look at how the church functioned in Acts and in the Bible. What was kind of the essential attributes? And I think you would find it's more about community than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So you take chapter 2, is they got together, they studied the apostles' doctrine. So there's study of the word together.
Mm-hmm.
They were eating together. They were praying together. Just spending a lot of time together. And so for me, what's been kind of troubling, I think, troubling. The thing I've been, well, as a senior pastor, I think the pressures that were mounting for me that kind of got me to move in that direction was just, I felt like we always had to keep this machine going. We had to, Sunday morning, that was and even when the quarantine was kind of, for me, also
It's hard for a lot of people.
Yeah, hard.
In their sense of ecclesiology is what I mean.
Right. Yeah, and so for me, it was kind of a aha moment. What is church for people? Well, it's as long as we have the broadcast. Hey, we're a church. Really?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Again, broadcasts aren't bad. We do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if that's what church is to us, then we have a poor understanding what church is. It's not very much. And I think
especially understanding of the local church, what the local church is. I think. Yeah. We'll keep going.
Yeah, and I think it's actually challenged that. Like because the quarantine is kind of, in some sense, it's like taking all the extra out. So we're kind of left with kind of these raw relationships. What are the relationships that really matter? That and sometimes we're finding, well, I didn't really have too many meaningful relationships. But maybe not. I'm just but I think it is, and that's why I'm so, like, when we're planning this church, I'm like, for me, a key is discipleship. That's like central to what we're doing. And kind of my idea of how we're starting it is building relationships, right? Because that's key to discipleship. I think that's key to us as humans, and it's key to our relationship with God. It's what is Christianity? It's a relationship with God. So it's also then entails a relationship with people who are made in the image of God. So I think if that's kind of the foundation, then I think everything else then kind of falls into place. Then okay, we want to have a worship team because this and this, right?
Mm-hmm.
We want to have a Sunday school because we want the children to connect with each other, and just begin to think through why we have these things. It's not just if we have this, then we have church. No, church is a community of believers that I'm trying to give a succinct definition, but a community of believers that comes around God's word and is connected to Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what we're trying to do here. Is we want to first connect people to Christ and then to each other, and hopefully, like, I'm not just about planning this one church, but I want to see a movement of church planting, something that's sustainable, that works. That's not this because the idea might be too, like, oh, well, we need a building. Oh, why do you need a building? I mean, it's not bad, but if that's our first idea, that really makes it hard to plant churches in, because we have to have enough money to rent a facility. We have to be illegal, just all these different things that makes it very, very complicated, where they didn't need all that. I mean, church buildings, you can do your research on that. But church buildings was something later. I think it was what, 3rd, 4th century, where they actually began to have these dedicated facilities. It was
when it was finally legal to have them.
Yeah, because
In the Roman Empire.
Yeah, but it was, and actually, when you read, if you look into that book, Forgotten Ways, he talks about this. Like, what fascinated him was with the exponential growth of Christianity. And I don't have the figures written down. I should have written them down. But just, it's incredible how fast that grew in just a century, 2 centuries. Our modern day example would be China, and they don't have these, these hierarchical, very organized structures. But there's millions that are, I don't know. There's again, I don't want to make a mistake on the numbers, but there's all these home churches. There's exploding, and I mean, I wish anyway, you can look at it in that book. It just excites me to see it happening without worship teams, without Sunday school, without the highly organized structures. Again, those things aren't bad, but just when we kind of limit ourselves to that, we're limiting, I think, what God would want to do. Because
or when we make those things God for us.
And we have what it takes, I think. As a church, God has put that in us. There's a DNA in us to reproduce, and not thinking that we have to have something from the outside or some specially trained people. There. Okay, I don't know if it makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
To answer your question, I forget what your original question was.
Towards church teams, like, okay, what does your team look like, and what would you consider? Okay, if essentials don't look like Sunday school, worship team, tithe and offering team, parking team, like all of these mega church aspects, that basically have to be there if you're going to have a building where you're expecting 20,000 people on a Sunday, like if that's not in the narrow definition of this is the church, what is the essential team that comes together and says, now we're ready to plant a church? Is it you and your wife and your 6 kids? Or, do you have 2, 3, 4, 7, 10 people around you that say, maybe we don't live in Pudil, but we're going to come together and we're going to pray for this neighborhood, and or have people moved to Pudil, that kind of thing. What's the team?
All right. How much time we have here?
Well, I've got another hour at least. So.
Okay. Those are good questions and things. And again, I feel like when you're telling me, I want to interview on church plan, I'm like, what do I got to say? I mean, it just seems, in some sense, I feel like I'm at the beginning again. I'm just learning.
Yeah.
Hopefully that can encourage you. I'm kind of right there with all you guys trying to figure this out. Praying and just seeking God for it. But we have, we've encouraged our team to move here. So not everybody's living here yet, but actually one member of the team just moved.
Wow.
And they actually want to. It's not like, hey, this is a requirement. But
you're not like forcing them to.
Yeah, they want to. They see because they want to hang out together and hang out with the people we're getting to know.
That's beautiful.
And of course, then after our events, having to go back home, it's kind of a bummer. But that taking in Kiev, it can take pretty long to get back to where you live.
Yeah.
But and you can, if you're going to pray for us, you can pray for that, because there's one girl still trying to find a place, and it's pretty hard. It's to find a place right now. Let's see. So I think it is good to live where you're planning a church. It's not, I guess it wouldn't be absolutely essential, but I think it's a good thing, because you more naturally build relationships with people, because you get to know people when you go to the store, when you go to the market, and if you're working in that neighborhood, it's another net of a circle of relationships. So I think it's highly
advantageous, for sure.
Advantageous to do that. Yeah, to do that. Thanks. Okay, a team. What kind of team? Well, I guess I'll start with the church planner. I think that there was a question there in the comments.
Yeah. Tim, I think, asked that one.
Yeah. And you, by the way, you can, in city to city. I don't know if it's on their website, but I know there was it was in the materials. We were looking at what it takes to be a church planter. What the attributes are,
Mm-hmm.
because church planters are different. I'm seeing that
Mm-hmm.
they're different than the pastor who is feels called to a church for a long period of time, or maybe for life.
Yeah.
And I'm finding more of that. That's been my kind of angst, I guess, and as I've been a pastor, but coming down to terms with the fact that I'm not so much a pastor. I have I have those gifts.
Mm-hmm.
That's my primary calling. I love being a church planter, and so I think I felt a lot of times kind of some cabin fever, feeling
Mm-hmm.
stir crazy because I'm here too long, and not realizing that's why, because it's in me that I need to go out and start new stuff, or else
Mm-hmm.
I'm just withering. When it comes down to starting to organize things, kind of that just doesn't do anything for me. I kind of wither. And
Gotta know your gifting. You gotta work on that.
yeah, and even preaching, I don't like I don't like giving sermons. It's a painful process for me.
I getcha.
And I'm realizing that that's okay. It's you want to empower than others to do that.
Mm-hmm.
When I need to, I do it. But I love, what really moves me, what really gets me going is church planting, is discipling new converts, talking with non-believers and explaining them the gospel in a way they can understand. It's actually counseling. I love, really kind of, it fascinates me how people change, and how to help that along.
Mm-hmm.
It also is very difficult because I have, how do I change myself? That's really hard too. But anyway, that's, so I think a church planter is more of an entrepreneur. And a guy that's been really mentoring me, coaching me, was saying, I think it's like 2% of the population are entrepreneurial, and then that kind of carries over into the church. Those are the church planters. So it's a, I guess you'd say, a rare breed, not to be prideful, but and it really was freeing for me to understand that hey, you're part of that 2%. So don't waste your time. Don't wait, by trying to force yourself into something that's not you. You need to be doing the church planting if that's what you're gifted at, what you like doing. There's not a lot of people that do that, So I would say that the church planter is more the entrepreneurial, pioneer, just and what kind of characteristics I would say. I think willing to I think be ready to face setbacks, because when you start out something, it's in business too, right? You're gonna try things that's gonna fail,
Mm-hmm.
and you're gonna have to kind of back up and start again, or there's a lot of unpredictability in it. So I think if you want a church plant, that has to be something that you can handle and deal with.
Mm-hmm.
And because even in my experience of starting a team, we've had kind of this idea, okay, these are the people, and it seemed like it was going to work, and then last minute this person says, well, no, I can't really do it, and they back out maybe before we start or at the beginning, and or somebody you've really invested in then leaves, so
Mm-hmm.
there's going to be all those kind of things that happen, and I think you have to be able to roll with that. So I don't know if it helps, but
yeah, I think that answers partly what Tim asked in the comments there. What characteristics would you say are essential or highly desirable for the church planting pastor and or team? What I'm hearing from you is the people that are ready to get out the machetes and hack through the forest, and start those first paths, pioneering, basically. Not the people that are, the steamrollers that are going to make everything nice and smooth, but you're going to be in the thick, getting malaria. And
I think it's vision that's moving you, that you see how it could be. It might change, of course. I've had ideas that, it's gonna be like this, and then it changes, but you're excited by this vision. It doesn't mean you're always I don't know. There's downs, of course, but you have you're moved by this vision.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you might not know exactly how to get there, and which is why you need others to help come alongside. But you kind of have this idea in your mind what you're wanting to get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and I would say I think that's been maybe something that's held the church back too, is that you can read about this in the books I mentioned, like in Forgotten Ways or Things to Come, The Shaping of Things to Come. This whole idea on leadership in the church, and the idea that like the pastor gifting, that's the leader.
Mm-hmm.
And it is one, I think. But I think if you go to Ephesians 4, and this could be another whole podcast on this, but
yeah,
looking at the 5 gifts, right, or the gifted people that God gives to the church, the apostles, evangelists, prophets, pastors, teachers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and I'll throw this out, okay, because we could go really deep into this, but
mm-hmm.
I think one thing that's kind of weakened the church, the movement of the church, is just focusing on that one pastoral leadership
mm-hmm.
role, which is a valid role, important to keep the church functioning. But what it's done is there's an outward movement, because you don't have the apostles. The apostles, I believe, are the ones that are the church planners, that are the entrepreneurs. That's how I see it. And again, we can go into all that, but when you take that out, when you don't recognize that as essential, as a leadership role, then you're kind of handicapping the church, and the church becomes this more inward focus, because the pastoral role, what is that? It's to take in, to care, to tend, which is important and essential. But if it's only that, then we have as a church that's just taking care of itself and taking care of the people inside, but without any really outward movement, without a missional focus. And so that's why I believe we need to come back to that more biblical idea of leadership, where you have you have the apostles who are kind of pushing people out and saying, hey, we got to let's do this. We got to start this work over here. You have the evangelist who has that gift of bringing people to Christ and being an example and kind of modeling that. Then you have the prophet who challenges the status quo, who's like saying, no, we're in this time and this is what we need to be doing, or questioning things that we've always done. That's a prophet, I think. And then you have the teacher, which is kind of systematizes what you're doing. So they're kind of maybe organizing the discipleship or the teaching. Very important too. And it can be, and again, there's a lot of overlap in these giftings, but I think when we kind of become more, I think we need to kind of look at leadership in a different way,
Mm-hmm. Is that you or me? I hear some kind of ringing.
Let me turn it off. Sorry about that.
It's all right. It happens. I do hear what you're saying there. I think, I love Paul's picture of the body of Christ in 1 Corinthians 12 through 14. I love how he just explains everything. There's no one that's like vestigial. There's no one that's, purposeless. Like everybody has a place, everybody has a purpose, everybody has a gift, and you cannot, he really, I think, he says that you shouldn't overemphasize one thing over another. Yeah. And he was fighting against the Corinthians doing this very thing. They were emphasizing a particular gift over all of the others, which is kind of what you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
And like if you look at a body and like let's say you have a really, really, really strong right leg, and that right leg is like really, really, really healthy, but your left leg is kind of gaunt and it's been in a cast for 6 months or something like that. Even if it kind of works, you're still lame. Like you're still going to be, hobbling around and if you blindfold the person, they're going to like go off course, because the structure of the body will lead them in a direction rather than them wanting to go in the direction that they're trying to go to. So I think you're right that that we need to work in the giftings that God gives us, not just the not just the boxes that people put us in.
Right.
So yeah. Can we go to a couple more of those questions from the comments?
Sure.
Tim asks another great question, kind of honing in more about this ecclesiology, what is the church, and that kind of thing that you wanted to talk about. He says, what is the ultimate goal of church planting? We'll just go through these questions like one by one. What is the ultimate goal of church planting? How far along should the church be before it's considered planted and ready for the next level or phase. And then I would add a follow-up question. If you're a church planter, George, how do you know if this is the level where you pass it on to somebody else?
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? So let's try to tackle that one as best we can.
Yeah, those are good questions, and actually things I'm
Praying
wrestling with.
through.
Yeah, and as we're gonna, we've seen it happen too. I mean, there's some experience there, but at the same time, I'm thinking about ahead for us. What's it going to look like? You know, when do I pass it on, or who do I need to start focusing on a person at the beginning? Anyway, so the first question was.
Let's talk about the ultimate goal. Yeah, what's the ultimate goal of church planting?
Yeah, well, I would go back to Jesus' words about making disciples of all nations.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and that reminds me of a good resource too for disciples. I think discipleship is so key. If you would go to it's called the Verge Network.
Okay.
And there's all sorts of people on there. There's Alan Hirsch, like I mentioned, but there's also, what's the guy who wrote Radical? Dave Platt's?
Yeah, David Platt.
David Platt. Yeah, David Platt. Francis Chan is on there. I think, blanking here. The guy in the Biblical Counseling Movement.
Tripp,
yeah.
Paul Tripp.
Right. Go there. They have all sorts of stuff on discipleship. So I would recommend. I'm just starting to go through some of that, and it's really good. Anyway, discipleship. I think that's a way you can kind of gauge what where you're headed. As Jesus said, go and make disciples of all nations.
Could I stop you there though? Because like any church, regardless of what stage it's in, is supposed to be doing discipleship. Yeah. So I think this particular question is honing in more on particularly not church, but church planting. Like, what's the goal there? Does that make sense? Like, yes, discipleship, of course, but you know.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I think, again, I'm trying to work this out myself. But I think we have a similar goal. I don't. Okay, church planting. You're very more evangelistically minded at the beginning. You really want to make those connections. Like for me, that's a big part of what I do. I'm trying to, any way I can, connect with people, non-believers. So at least half the time I want to spend with non-believers. Okay, but the goal, you're talking about the goal. Well, what I want to see is these people come to Christ and then be discipled, being, and I want to get that across to all my team. I want all of us to be doing that. It's not the one person, me or others, but we all need to be. And what does that look like? It's both individual and group. It's again, I'm working through it, but it's about building relationships, about sharing your life. And that also means bringing people alongside what you're doing. As you build relationships, as there's more trust, bring them into your home, going to their homes. So I think any way you can do that, any way you can should be open and transparent to those you're ministering to or working with. That includes your team too. Like I'm trying to become more and more, connect with our team. So I'm thinking of ways to, where we do a study together, but also we're sharing our lives, our testimonies, and working through issues together. And part of that is maybe we're reading a course and then talking about it. Okay, I hope I'm not rambling too much.
No, you're right.
So again,
you're
discipleship.
Right. Very good stuff.
Okay.
I'm tracking along with you, thinking along.
The discipleship. You want to, and that's why. But it's also, as we interact together, I want the other people, the non-believers, to see that. So it looks. I want to build a culture, right?
Okay.
And again, I'm also looking back how we did it when we first got into Ukraine. We did a lot of things right. We were really focused on a neighborhood, and I remember seeing this as these young people were coming to Christ and kind of figuring out what it was about. We as Americans trying to figure out how to pass on this faith, which isn't American.
Yeah.
Working through our cultural issues and trying to figure out what it looks like to be a Christian in the Ukrainian context. But what happened was, as we would build, relationships, as we were discipling people, kind of figuring this out, we were building a culture Christian culture. And then what the great thing about that is, then as non-believers come in, they're seeing right away. They're seeing what it means to be a Christian. And of course we make mistakes, and and that's part of it too, is showing them how we deal with our flaws, how we ask for forgiveness, how do we repent, and how we admit to each other our failures, and then accept each other. All that is part of it. But having that culture, which is, there's grace, there's the gospel. I think it's really helpful, and I want to get to that place, because then that's really, I think, when you start to snowball, when people, and when person comes to Christ, right away they see, okay, that's what it means. That's what it means to live as a Christian. And it's really instructive. And I think that's why Jesus had communities. He never really, somebody pointed that out recently. He wasn't really just focused on one person. He had very few, he had 12 disciples, right? Even that inner circle is 3 people, because you need that culture, you need that interaction. So I think as church planning, you want to create as many opportunities for discipling. And that means a lot of relationship building in the initial stages. You're trying to figure out, it can be English club, it can be, actually, okay, here's maybe an idea. What we've been doing a lot of is just looking at what's going on in the community. Like when I first moved here, I looked in Facebook. You can look at other social media. What are the groups here in Podil? I get into search. So I ended up becoming part of this Podil Facebook group that was founded by a guy who wanted to change the community for better, bring people together. Great idea. He's not a Christian. Nice. But I got to know him, and there's like 5,000 people in this group, and I ended up meeting him one of these, because I went to a meeting. It was called a Vision for Deal, and so they were trying to bring in businesses together. I saw it, and I got to go to that. I'm a church planner, so I'm like, okay, where's it happening? So I went there and I met this guy, and he's like, hey, yeah, cool. And I told him I'm a pastor. I want to, you want to be a blessing to the community. And I said, what can we do? And so we actually sat down for coffee, and he just gave me all these ideas. Like, oh, right. Gave me a video that his friends did on the profile of a person who lives in Fadil. So all this great information. And
very cool.
And he said, go ahead and write a post on my, on the group and introduce yourself. So I did. I told just told what we were doing. I'm a pastor, and I'm this and that, and put a picture of our family, and we got all these just wonderful comments like, oh, welcome, and then they get to know, hey, we're there, Yeah. So, so then they do this garage sale once a month. Well, quarantine, you got to change that. But so we became part of that and helping out and organizing it. And so the idea behind it, which I agree with, is great, is to bring neighbors together, is to get not so much to sell things. That's part of it. But the idea is to actually interact more as neighbors.
Very cool.
Hey, that's cool. I want to do that. So I've been finding what's going on that's good, that you can affirm. Another thing is there's a soup kitchen here, where they're feeding the pensioners, the people, elderly. So we started volunteering for that, and became, so I think as Christians we can, maybe it's because in the past there wasn't so much going on, right? And so we're more starting things. But I think we should come in too and look, where can I join in and help things? And that, again, that's another topic, because you can think, well, what good can non-Christians do? I mean, that kind of, it really depends on your theology. Well, I think, though, that we can come alongside and show, hey, we love people. And that's why we want to be part of what you're doing, because we want to bring the greatest good. And of course, we're going to be talking about why we do these things. We're going to talk about the gospel just naturally, not like, okay, I'll do this for you if you listen to my sermon or if you come to my Bible study. No, we help unconditionally, but we're going to be talking too about why we do things, because we love them, because we want them to come to know Christ, the greatest good. They're not going to ram it down their throats.
Yeah.
And so, like that, what Jesus said, your light so shine before men that they see your good works and glorify your Father who's in heaven. So, I mean, these good works then lead to a way to share the gospel. So church planning, discipleship.
Going back to the question.
Great.
So what I hear, if I can like systematize this, because I love doing that kind of thing. What I hear from you is you're going from like individual, like close group discipleship, and as the group grows a little bit. Correct me as I go along, if I get something wrong. But you're building an atmosphere
Yeah.
and a community, and then that builds into like this culture
Yeah.
that is the church, where and still as the group grows, and that grows into a movement. And as these different stages are going along, you're also engaging with the culture around you and looking for what you can affirm, what you can be a part of as the church,
Yeah.
pouring into your community and being that light and that salt in the community and sharing the gospel while serving, right?
Right.
So as we're going along, when is the church planted?
Yeah. And that's a good question. And I think it's a bit fluid too, because,
Of course.
well, and it's because maybe it again goes back to our idea of church.
Yeah.
For me, I want, okay, what I want to see is I think church planting should be something that's just natural for the church. It's not like something like, okay, now we're this number, maybe we should think about church planting. That's what, big churches do. No,
Yeah.
I mean, it should be part of the DNA of the church.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be something that's jolting, which has kind of been troubling for me to see that it's something that's like, what, church planting? Like it's some kind of rocket science for special cases. I think it should be something natural. So the way I see it is, as we disciple people, as we form them into, as we, it becomes a community culture, a church, right? Community of believers that honors Christ. I think what I hope to see, what I want to be, and we're going to kind of see how it goes, but I want to instill from the beginning that we want to, take this news to other people. We want to reach other people. So I'm hoping to see this, kind of start more communities in Padil, but not only here, but other places in the city, which also I'm trying to network with other church planners. Like I think that's important too, to know what's going on in the city and partner. I want to find out what's working, what's not working, in this culture, in this setting. So I think it's going to be part of also more citywide kind of partnering with other people, and people get discipled. Maybe there'll be people that like say, hey, I want to do that too, or I want to, and say, okay, hey, we got this place, we want to start there, or maybe somebody's living there and they become a Christian, and say, hey, why don't you then take some believers, get together, start praying. Yeah, of course, in our church right now, we have people all over the city. So, I mean, I guess I'm hoping too that people kind of catch the vision and see, oh, that's what you're talking about. Because I've talked about it for a while, but people are like, what are you trying to split us up or break apart? I want to kind of have something I can point to, like a model, and say, okay, no, this is what you want to do. That, let's do it. That makes sense. I mean, so it's kind of a never-ending story, hopefully. And so when is it planted? I guess when you have the people that kind of recognize themselves as a church, as a group of believers, something like that. I don't know.
As I'm listening to you, I wonder if we're thinking in the wrong, like if we're asking the wrong question. Does that make sense? It makes sense what you just said, like that when people see themselves as this, like this is the individual, this is my local church, and that's when the church is planted, right? Where there's already like this is a self-sustaining body type thing where people like this is their church, right? Yes, but at the same time, I wonder if we're asking the wrong question. Because of what you said about how it's fluid, how it should be like this kind of organic movement type thing, right? So I don't know. Maybe we need to have you on a couple months down the road when you're.
Yeah. Well,
we'll keep on thinking through this.
I think it's good. I think it's maybe a little bit fearful. It's like, oh, we're kind of letting go of these preconceived notions. And there's that fear. I mean, I have that fear too. It's like, wow, I'm trying something new. What if it fails? Okay, so what if it fails? Let's try this. We'll try something else. I think we should, as Christians, should be experimenting in a good way. Especially with the culture. Just, man, so many changes have happened just over the past few years. And I feel like we're kind of behind. I think we're not. Okay, just this gets me excited. I'm thinking, in Kiev, how many new neighborhoods have gone up and are going up right now? but it breaks my heart that when we don't have any people in there from the ground. I mean, these neighbors are starting from the ground up. I mean, there's going to be a culture in that place. There's going to be networks forming. What if Christians were there at the very, very beginning?
Yeah.
Blessing those neighbors and saying, hey, hey, we have kids, come over, because there's no connections yet, no social connections.
Yeah.
What if we were there on the ground floor? I mean, that would be incredible. I mean, there's just so many things going on that we're kind of stuck with this Sunday morning mentality, program mentality. I want to break that out and so that we can start a movement,
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I'm the only one. There's others too. I want to join forces and start.
So who else? I mean, like, I really don't know a whole lot of Calvary Chapel pastors here in Ukraine that seem to be that excited about planting the next church. So like, can you talk a little bit about that? Because you said there are other people, right? So like it. Yeah, it seems to be to me to be kind of a weak spot for us here.
Yeah, I'd say generally, maybe not just Calvary Chapel, but others. I think we've become more. Well, because this kind of approach worked in the '90s, I think, when it was all new. People would come. Something new. Oh, what's that about? But I think in time, I think it's become more kind of relevant, unfortunately, and we haven't been really engaging the culture. But at the same time, I see some people that are really wanting to go out and try these things. So I mean, in Kiev, in the incubator course I'm taking, there's several from Kiev, and so we're trying to actually get together more. There's another guy from the evangelical seminary near here that's planning an international church. He's trying to reach foreigners. We've talked a lot. He's talked about approaches and stuff. And then there's a Pastor Anatoly's son, his new wife. We talked, and they're trying to kind of become more that way too, like to start these groups all over the city. So I look forward to kind of getting together with them some more and talking about it, because they've done some training that sounds really good. So I guess I'm saying is, in Calvary Chapel, well, Ben, of course.
Yeah.
Guy now Nate Medlong, he's now taken over the pastorate in Kharkiv, and I think he has a vision for having more of a citywide reach. I'd say it is a weak spot. So
that's okay. Like that, one of the things that I want to do with this podcast is talk through some of these things. Like, I know Calvary Chapel is a very informal movement and that kind of thing. So I think this is one of the ways maybe that we can address these issues, is like we just talk about them and we try to give the best answer we can with the help of the Holy Spirit and the wisdom the Lord gives us. And hopefully the people that watch will then pray through these things and think, okay, well, maybe I can do this differently, or maybe we should be thinking more about church planting, or maybe we should be praying about, supporting somebody that is church planting or something like that. At least that's what our church has thought about doing, is like taking a certain percentage of our Sunday tithe and giving it to a church planter.
Right.
Because keep going.
Okay. There's one guy also actually in the Kiev church, and he and his wife have been praying and would like to move to start planting a church in another region. Cool. Right now he's helping a lot in the administration of the church. But what was I going to say? I think what can limit us too is that building, is about like having a building. But I want to also break out of that too more and think, like, even I've been thinking about where we're going to have our service. Well, I don't know yet. It's going to be about discipleship. It's going to somehow help that discipleship process happen, because that's my goal, is discipleship.
Yeah.
What about doing it in a public place? I think it's a challenge too. Could you do your church service in a cafe?
If the cafe was okay with it, I'd be perfectly fine with that.
Yeah. I mean, not so like, okay, now we're starting, this, but it, like this performance, but it's more about, could it be something people would like be actually intrigued? It's like, oh, that's interesting. Not like, this, you know what I'm saying? Because I think some of our churches they're so kind of cliquish, and so that people coming in, they have to kind of get used to it. It's not something that it's like something strange. It's like from another planet somewhat. but could you do it like so that people would say, you know, it makes sense to them in some way. I mean, of course, it's not all going to make sense because you're not a believer, right? But
Yeah.
you know, David did say, "I will sing among the nations," right? I mean, didn't David say a lot about that?
Yeah.
About declaring to all of creation. So his praise was something that would affect others, you know.
Yeah.
Just a question, just to think about, and just so that we don't get hung up on buildings, because like that can also limit our church planning if we think we gotta have a building. But what about trying some public places? You know, I don't know,
Yeah.
just being at this park where we do our English club has given us so many opportunities just to talk and make friendships. And actually, a few weeks ago, it was Pride, you know, and so Padilla is a liberal region, so I mean
Yes.
it's pretty progressive in that sense.
Yeah.
So I mean, you see it, you know.
It's almost, I almost think of it as like maybe not this far, but like almost like the San Francisco of
Yeah,
Ukraine, that kind of thing. So
and they pride themselves in that, I think, in like tolerance and progressive. I mean, but there are also different age groups here. There's different, so I wouldn't like generalize it completely, but
yeah.
there's a tendency towards that. So what they did was they brought in this big drone that Sunday into the park, tied a rainbow flag to it, and they were gonna like fly it over the city and stuff. I think they'd done it in other places as well, but and so
I
you
saw
know
that.
they're doing this, and I'm talking to this guy who actually made this Facebook group because he's involved in all these different projects, and actually a really great guy. But he was sitting down, and there's this girl that had happened to come to the park when we were doing English, and she joined us, and she's this BBC journalist, Ukrainian, and just really kind of connected with her, and great gal. But and then, so they just asked me and say, okay, so yeah, we know you're a Christian. What do you think about this? So, oh, okay, here we go. So
Opportunity, man. Praise the Lord.
I'm trying to think, how do explain it in a way to
Yeah.
understand, but not be compromising anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I felt like I did okay, I did a decent job. But anyway, I mean, if I wouldn't have been in that place, in that public place, I wouldn't have that opportunity. I could be preaching about homosexuality and all that stuff in the church, and maybe have a great talk. But
Yeah.
who's listening, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think we need to get out those public. Where's the public conversations happening? I think
Yeah.
Paul was great at that. He found the places where they were talking, whatever, not necessarily about Christian things, actually not, but it was where there was, people were talking about things where there was life. And so he would go there because he had the greatest news. Yeah. And so he ended up, getting a in Athens, right? He had that, given a platform to speak in kind of their main square, It's because he was going around talking, he was trying to engage. So I think as Christians, we need to be somehow, okay, maybe we don't know how to do it. Maybe we're going to be experimenting. Fine. Just go out there and do it. We are salt, we are light. And if we put ourselves out there, I think it's going to happen.
And the Holy Spirit will guide us through those things. We can't be afraid of these things because, I mean, the Holy Spirit will be with us. I think those conversations, having those conversations in public places with those types of people, and them asking, and you're realizing, okay, I have to approach this with love. I think that will change the way we'll then preach these things on Sunday mornings. I was thinking about, just as you were talking, I was thinking through a conversation I had with a friend of mine who, he's another pastor, and he has some relatives that are part of the LGBT community. They were, quiet about it. They would go to church with him every once in a while and that kind of thing. And the preaching that went on in that church, whenever they touched the issue, was very much us and them. In other words, they were never expecting a person, and they never realized that person was a part of that, community. So it was very alienating. And so, but when you talk to these people and you realize they're actually real people with real questions, with real issues, that that kind of thing, it'll change the way we preach, and it'll make us better preachers of the gospel, whether you're on the street or in the church or wherever else.
Yeah. I mean, how are we gonna? I think, how are we going to reach them? I mean, if it's, we can, yeah, that's a whole nother issue, but
Yeah.
you know, we can speak the truth and say right things, but are they going to actually listen to us?
Yeah.
Are they going to, we're going to engage them? I think what you're saying is right. We first need to listen to them so we can learn. Well, yeah, out of respect and love, because they're created in the image of God, you know.
Yeah.
So understand them, understand their hearts, their dreams, their fears, and
even their objections, because like there's so many caricatures.
Yeah.
Like I think almost in almost every conflict that I know of that's like political or social or whatever, like you read these posts and you read those posts
Yeah.
Of people on social media, and they're reading the sound bites, but they're not actually talking to the people, and there's no conversation. Anyway, yeah, I think we should move on to the next questions because we're probably running out of time. So Christina writes, another good friend of ours. She wrote, "How long does it take to plant a church?" Which I think we kind of like touched on that it's a very fluid process, right? But she writes, and then turn it over to a local pastor and leaders. So how do you know when they're ready for you as the church planter to pass it on to the pastor teacher, if we're quoting Ephesians chapter 4, like from apostle to pastor teacher, from apostle to prophet, or that kind of thing. So like how do you know when it's time to move on to the next region or whatever?
I think that's a huge question, but good question. By the way, Tim and Christina, we are on our church planning team in Chernobyl, so
sweet.
From them. Well, I guess what comes to mind is you look at what Paul would say. He was talking about, he told Timothy, talked to Timothy about ordaining, local leadership, elders, deacons, and that's in First Timothy, right? Chapter 3, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And then Titus 2, he talked a similar kind of command to him, and so he gave some criteria. So I think we can look at those. I think those are helpful. And again, you have to kind of look at what they meant in that culture. But I would say generally, when you look at those characteristics, it's about character, right? It's not so much about ability, although I think that's important. But I guess for people then so you need some time for sure. You need somebody who's become mature as a believer and exhibits those qualities that are listed there. So I think maybe you can summarize him as a person who's spiritual, who's guided by God, and his character reflects the character of God. And if leadership, I think it also talks about being able to tend to others, pastor them, like it was talking about, if a person takes care of his family well, that's an indication that he's ready to take on the church. So I guess you would look at that. So maybe character, would you look to him as an example as a Christian? And then maybe then is there a tendency or his heart to take care of other people spiritually? They have a concern to shepherd them. And I think maybe those two things, and you need some time. It's not like you just right away ordain somebody. I mean, you need some time to see that, because Paul talks about the danger of laying hands on somebody too quickly.
Yeah.
So I mean, there needs to be that time so they don't become prideful, like, oh, now I'm this big shot. But as somebody who's shown Christian character, which is, a lot of it's humility, right? A lot of it's being a servant, because I think if somebody's a servant, you can trust that kind of person who has the interests of others in mind. And not out, for their own agenda, but they have this genuine concern to help others succeed as Christians, to grow. And I guess, and so, and you probably would also, I would see how they, as you give them different responsibilities, or how do they handle those things? Start with smaller things. I don't know if that's, you get more practical, but I guess generally look for that. I don't know, you have any other questions about that, or what?
Well, like, how do you know when particularly the second half of the question, how do you know when it's time to move on?
Oh, time to move on.
When it's okay, this person is the pastor instead of me.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Or does that need to happen? That kind of thing. So
yeah. Well, yeah.
Nick Cady had an interesting example when we were talking through the comments leading up to this episode. He set out when he planted a church in Hungary to say, okay, he told everybody in the church plant, I'm here for 5 years or something like that, and they raised up a pastor, had him on the church salary, and he left, and it was like, not to the day, but it was 5 years, and so like. I don't think I think that's like an ideal case, a very rare case. But how do you know when it's time to move on?
Yeah. Well, I guess a couple of things. I think what he did was good. And I'm wanting to do more of that is right from the beginning, look for those people that God's raising up, and actually I knew of a guy who did a church plant in Africa, cover pastor. And he actually, from the get-go, like he was coming over, he's going to plant a church. So he thought, well, it means I'll be the pastor. Well, through a series of events and conversations, he realized, no, I think I need to go over there right away, have somebody. It's kind of maybe somewhat of a rare occasion, but he felt like he needed to have somebody that was right from the get-go the pastor. And he was going to help him, kind of mentor him on the job.
Wow.
So he came across a guy who had been a believer. He was mature in a Calvary. And it just worked out that he was actually from that same region, and he talked to him about it, and they're like, yeah, let's do it. And so they joined forces, joined together, partnered. And so he was kind of helping the guy plant the church, but then, everybody called the other guy the pastor. So, I mean, he had leadership. I guess you could say, from our kind of previous questions, he was the apostle, not church planter, which is that there's authority there too. There's a leadership role there. And by the way, I think, when you have that, and I think we've seen that in our Calvary movement in Ukraine. I mean, my dad was kind of an apostle, John Shubik in some sense, and others. And so they kind of did what Apostle Paul did. They would write, when they left, they would still keep in contact and like, how's things going? They would come back for conferences. There's still this leadership, this respect for them, kind of this oversight. So I think that's not a bad model, I think. And I want to do that. I'm not sure. Again, I'm experimenting. I'm trying to
yeah.
I would like, as much as possible, not to identify myself, as the, kind of pastor who's going to be here for life.
Yeah.
I want to be the one who's planning and then trying to empower others and those that God is calling. Now, again, since it's kind of new, I don't know, maybe God will bring somebody who's already experienced, mature, which actually that happened in Chernobyl. The guy who's now the pastor there, he had some experience, and he had some kind of, God had called him to leadership, but he needed to see the model. He needed to be kind of discipled, and there's a lot of issues there, but had to grow in pastoring people and actually, really servant leadership. But now he's doing awesome, So I guess it can be different, but I would say I like that idea. I think again, it's that idea of the leadership is not just pastoral. It can be apostolic. It's different, more broader. And so, if you do that, then I want to try to maintain my role as church planner more, because also I don't want to be people looking at me as the pastor in the sense that, okay, now take care of us. I feel like I need to be the one that's free. I don't know, but using my gift of bringing in new people, of starting new things. I don't want to get tied down, negative words, but it's not my gifting to stay in one place. And so I don't want to I'll be careful not to limit what God wants to do through me in that area, right?
Yeah.
And empower that person that has that gift. So if that makes sense or not. So that kind of maybe could change things a bit. I hope to see a quicker turnaround, more like 2 or 3 years, but we'll see. I do think it is important not to rush things, but
Yes.
there also can be the tendency to, I've seen that where you can overstay your
And
time.
that's where I think our movement leans towards is more the too much time than too little time.
Yeah.
At the same time, Dennis and I talked about this in the last podcast episode, and I've talked with a couple of others about this thing. I also think we don't do the best job training the next people. So we overstay and we don't train.
Yes.
So, we need to, yeah, anyway.
Yeah, sure. Yes. And I think training too, it's all interwoven with discipleship, and I think, okay, so what am I going to, I had one of the thought I was going to say, I think it's because the founder of our movement, his gifting was pastoral.
Yeah.
He was an apostle in some sense, like he was an innovator.
But he didn't even plant Calvary Chapel.
Yeah, he just planted one. Yeah, and
he didn't even plant that church.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
He took it over.
Yeah.
So yeah.
We had a lot of great church planters that came out of that movement, but then because he wasn't that kind, and I don't think he set up a system that was. I mean, we can go into that, but I think you're right. I think there's lack of maybe intentionality and training that I think we could definitely. And I think there's a lot of happening. By the way, there's CGN now, kind of global network, and I think they're on the right track. They're wanting to provide more assistance and help and training. That's another resource you could go to, CGN.
Yeah.
And I would recommend them highly. I'm part of that. So, anyway, leadership too. I think again, it's about that idea of I think discipleship. That it needs to be a whole life thing. So,
I think that's also as a movement matures and everything. There are certain parts of like we don't have a Bible college yet in Ukraine, right? And that takes a lot of time and a lot of pieces coming together. Was there something else? I felt like I almost cut you off or something like that.
That's probably good. I mean, a lot of different rabbit trails here, but
yeah. The next question that kind of is related to what Nick Cady, his example in Hungary and everything with the church and supporting their own pastor. Lena asked, how do you help locals be in church ministry full time? Right. Do you wait until the new church can support them? Is it a Western American thing altogether and they don't have to be? Does it depend on the country, the cultural aspects? She says the last 3 questions are for clarification of the first one. Yeah. I have my own 2 cents, but I definitely want to hear your answer first. So
that's a really good question. Again, it's something I'm
wrestling through.
And I've changed, and my views have changed. Although there's a lot of core stuff that's stuck with me. And just okay. So from my experience, like especially it was in the 90s, that we were really big on indigenous. Like we wanted to see the church self-supporting. What is that, like self-governing, the three self, right? Yeah, that's good. I think, because we saw a lot of abuse, like where foreigners would come in with great intention, with at that time, there was a great disparity, right, between economically, like Americans were a lot richer, and they could, and dollars were really had a lot of value here. So it's very easy just to think, I'm going to throw money at this thing. And what happened was a lot of damage. There was a lot of money thrown around. But the problem with that was 2 things. One, because the differential, right? To be in ministry actually could be profitable. You could get a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
You made the right connections, which kind of tends to make things bad, right? Because as missionaries, also, you're coming in, you're taking a step down financially. I mean, again, it's a privilege and honor, but but when you kind of make it financially rewarding, there's dangers involved, right? And also you kind of attract the wrong kind of people. You attract these people who would seem like they're good guys, but actually they, like to have some money.
Yeah.
So I think it was good we were kind of wary of that. I think things have changed now.
We're actually still dealing with the aftermath of that.
Yes, that's
in
true.
Lviv.
Well,
I know personally of an example of a pastor that has basically turned his church into a business. So, I mean, the damage is real and it's long lasting, but keep going. I'm sorry. I don't mean to cut you off.
So then the challenge has been now, because I think we've had that mindset that at the same time, then sometimes people who work for the church, or maybe more often than not, they haven't received the support they needed or the salaries they needed. And so I've seen the damage done that way too, where they kind of feel like left out to dry, or there's no appreciation for what they do. And we know in scripture that the worker is worthy of his hire, so there does need to be adequate support, So then there's that balance, I think. And then should it come from the outside or just indigenous? I think both now. I think you have to be careful, but especially when you're starting out, I think you need some, I think a lot of times you need that extra money, maybe it helps, like the church planner, he's going in and you can't have a full-time job and be able to be effective and be able to make connections with the community. I think you need that at least initial support.
Yeah.
And we have that. I'm thankful for that. And also there's two couples in the Kiev church that they're getting some support because they're doing some of this pioneering work as well. And I was kind of instrumental in helping that happen, so I believe in that can be good and it can be helpful. You have to be careful, I think, how it's done. That doesn't damage, but we want to see the work move forward. There's also pluses in working too. So, I mean, I think, you're making connections. I've actually thought about that for myself. Like maybe I need to be doing something more job related here. We thought about business and we're still thinking about it just because
you want to be effective in ministry and
connect with people. It's not like, what do you do here? Kind of hang out all day but also I'll be connect with people because Padilla is a place where there's a lot of small businesses, and people starting up. And if you start something that's actually, it's also beneficial for the community, we can actually be an example. So again, I'm working through it. I don't know yet.
Yeah.
So that's kind of basically, I've thrown out the pluses, minuses.
For sure. Yeah, I did. I used to do a little freelancing. I don't anymore, but I used to do a little freelancing for local IT companies. And the relationships that I made were more than worth it. The time spent and the not distraction, but what's the right way to put that? Yeah. Anyway, I wasn't paid, I think, as much as the work was worth, but the relationships that I built with the people that I worked with were, amazing. So, and I'm still praying for those people that they would come to Christ and that kind of thing. And I'm still hope that God will use them. So, say that again. I'm sorry.
My wife, Sharon, she's doing some work right now. Actually, she's working, but doing translation, editing. So I mean, it's we have 6 kids. So I mean,
and support is often, one of those things that we don't talk about enough and everything. But it's very rare to have an overabundance, I think, for most missionaries. So sometimes you got to get a part-time job or something like that to make up for support. That's a normal thing. So.
It's a complex issue, but
The next question we have is from Paul, and I love this question. Our church has a system for the second half of this question, but the first part of it is a little harder here. I'm going to read it word for word. He says, how is the local church involved in a man's journey from being a drunken atheist at a bar to becoming a believer, to becoming a mature believer, to becoming a missionary. And for the believer, mature believer, missionary, that's discipleship that, like in Ukrainian, we would say, system as soboy, like we know how that works. But that first, going out and reaching him, like, what's you guys' process for this thing, if that makes sense?
Okay. I mean, you could go a lot of places with this, but
Yeah.
I made a great thing, by the way. I think it's probably a great thing to talk about with your leaders too. Just you can just talk about that, like, okay, how are we going to reach drunken atheist or whatever, and then what's the path he's going to take to do we have that in place? Do you have a strategy? Or and I think you should. I think you should have a strategy, and that's been a weakness, I think, of ours as well, is having that intentional path. So what's my plan?
It doesn't specifically have to be this case. I think you've already answered some of this. I'm sorry. It sounds like you're about to answer, so I don't want to cut you off. But it sounds like these Facebook groups and stuff like that. But keep going.
That said, it's great. I mean, we're church planning, so we're focusing on the first part right now for sure. But I would like to keep that in the DNA of the church, that we, and I think it depends on, a lot of things, like local churches. I mean, that's the best way to, or one of the best ways to put your church in a position. Because if you just meet on Sundays in this off, place where people just come to meet, but you're not really in a community, that doesn't really help your church then reach out. It kind of fosters the idea that this church is for us. It's a club where we come and feel good. I mean, it's great. We can come pray, worship, hear the word, have coffee, talk together. But there's no thought of the community around you, right? So I don't know if that's part of the question or not, but
yeah, it is.
Where your church is planted. Are you a local church? Then I would say, are you putting that out there as a vision for the church? Like, there's several things you could do. How would you encourage that? You could have people share testimonies, of how, there's one idea I've heard, give like 10, 15 minutes at the beginning and say, okay, who shared Christ with somebody today, during this week? Can you share your experience? So people can get up, I did this and that, and you can have some examples then and you're putting it forward as something that you're celebrating, that you're encouraging, and you want to encourage this, not something like that, you have to get a salary to do it, but I did this at my job. So it's really live examples that are relevant and doable.
Yeah.
That's one way. I mean, you could, and I think, like I was talking about, having a service or having some events that are outside right there where you have to interact.
Yeah.
Just providing those experiences that are positive, that you're showing how it's done. It's discipleship too, really. So I guess promoting a culture of that would be my answer in different ways.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Then what was next? So get saved, right?
Yeah.
Then,
then moving forward from believer to mature believer to a missionary in his own right of reaching his own community.
Right. Actually, there's this concept in, I think it's Center Church, called evangelistic pathways. And it's in the training where you think through from being, how are you going to engage non-believers? Then what's the next step? The next step. So, I mean, like, say you get this person, they're coming to this event, or you've met them, you've developed a relationship. And what we're trying to do next is actually we want to have a Bible study that's kind of a bridge where non-believers feel welcome. Discussion, so that's kind of our bridge at the moment. We're seeing that as a bridge to kind of get them then to engage with the Bible, and we can share Christ with them, but in a manner that's not as threatening or something. But then, I don't know, the next step would be more of a discipleship. They're a believer now, kind of having, maybe you could have a course, you could have alpha course, you could I don't know, there's just different stuff out there. You can just do a Bible study on a book, but any way to get them the basics, how they're to grow, reading the word, the spiritual disciplines. I think it's important for them to get the gospel, so there's some courses on that.
Do y'all in Kiev have like an induction course or like
yeah.
a course that's like based on getting people ready for baptism or something like that? Like that's a big thing in the Baptist church, at least here.
We were trying to get that together. We never really did that, but I think that's a good thing to do.
You might contact Mike Pratt. He called it Discovery, and I worked a little bit on the translation of this course, and I taught one of it's like 6 sessions or something like that. I think it's close to what Horizon Indianapolis does.
Oh, cool.
So I'm pretty sure they still use that for like a new believers home fellowship type thing, where they go through a particular course that explains the basic doctrines of the faith and that kind of thing. So
that's part of our it's one of our plans for the church plant, is we want to come up with some material, either find it or, like you said, or kind of design it. But I think it's good. I think having those kind of materials that you can just take and then use, it's nice. No guesswork. Then you can have people, as they go through it, and they can take that and teach it to somebody else. It's something they can take and reproduce. I think that's good. Then you want to make it, I'd say, be thinking how you would also be training your leaders too, like how, what kind of things you'd want to teach your leaders, right? Maybe have like I've heard this way, like a leadership pipeline. You have a discipleship pathway, a leadership pipeline.
Yeah.
So having some courses like, for preaching, for even like discipling others. How do you do that? Or how do you counsel others? And, we could really delve into that, but I think we've been weak on that, having that kind of, so a person who comes to church knows what next step they can take.
Yeah.
I think that's the key, kind of having this, what do I do next? I'm here new. I want to learn more, so, okay, we can plug it into this discipleship group. Or, how do you become a leader, or, then you have something for that.
Yeah.
Again, I'm working through this one, but I think that is important to have that kind of pathway. And I like the way that question, to think through that. Okay. I don't know if there's anything else I should comment on.
I don't know. I've been thinking about that. The leadership pathway in particular. Our church has a discipleship pathway. We call it the 5 chairs. And the idea is that each chair has a question that goes along with it that leads you to the next chair. So one of them is like, or not a question, it's more like a request to the person that's sitting on the chair. And the first request is like, come and see. And it's what Jesus said to the people that become the disciples. Come and see, and just be with us, come to the English club in the park, come to, hang out with me in the cafe, come and see us. The next one is repent and believe the gospel, where I think Jesus said that as well, where, the person is challenged to begin, to begin belief. And then the next one is follow me. So the discipleship, like formally begins. And then the next one is I will make you fishers of men. And so that's where a person is beginning in leadership, where they're starting to think about, okay, I'm not just being poured into, but I'm starting to pour into others. And then the last one, the 5th chair, is I send you out, where we believe this person, this is like our church council members, somebody that's an elder or a pastor, somebody that's ready to not just be a Sunday school teacher, but to lead Sunday school teachers, like that kind of thing. So that would be number 5. But for that leadership pipeline, I've been thinking more in the category of like what books I would require somebody to read. Aside from just having read the Bible through, the 21 Laws of Leadership. I recently read Extreme Ownership by a couple of Navy SEALs, Leif Babin and Jocko Willink. Those 2 books, most of those principles you find in the Bible. but they're honed in specifically for leaders where it's specific situations and why these things work and how they work and all those kind of things. So I think are just incredibly relevant for the church today, and it's systematized.
Yeah.
So and then a few others I've got ones for preaching, I've got ones for more discipleship one-on-one, and it's like things that I'm like, okay, this is okay, I see this weakness or this place where a person could grow. Here's a book, give me a report type thing on that.
So you have the teaching, kind of the teachings, or the gift of teaching. And that's great.
That's how my mind works.
This kind of stuff doesn't necessarily excite me.
I understand. Yeah.
I think it's crucial. And that's why I'm hoping, like, we don't have that yet in our team, I think. Somebody who's help us in kind of systematically bringing somebody through some education.
Yeah.
Although I think it's critical. I think it's because you look at the movements in the past too. I think in the, I think the Wesleyan, right, where Wesley was put together these like discipleship groups, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's really the power behind the movement. It wasn't just these crusades, but it was actually in what they did with the people afterwards. They were, plugged in and discipled. I think that's crucial. So I see the importance, and somebody that can systematize it. And I'm hoping that God kind of puts that in our team. Somebody who's going to be able to, because I'm just listening to you. It's like, oh, that's great, but oh man, that's so tiring.
Well, I love it, George, that you know what your gifting is. I mean, I know that maybe narrows your focus and you say, well, I can't do that and I can't do that. But listen, like I don't know, I struggled with that, man, for so many years trying to be something that I wasn't.
Yeah.
I mean, like year after year after year, and you're struggling, and you're working, and you're serving, and you're pouring your heart into something, but it just doesn't work. And then you realize, like 8 years into it, like it's just not my gifting. Like why didn't I just like do that for 6 months and say, well, that's not for me. Like no, but I like felt like I would be failing if I gave up. But it wouldn't be giving up; it would be passing on. There's a difference. So yeah, I'm excited that you know what you're supposed to do, that you know what how God's built you, So
yeah, we need to empower others. That's so much I want to see that. I want to see. It's not about me. I want to empower these people to do what they're called to do. And I'm looking forward to that. I love working together with people. And my dad was a great example of doing that, and of finding kind of being a talent scout.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be more of that. And so, yeah, great.
Do we have a little bit more time, because I saved the hardest question for last?
Oh, okay. All right. Actually, I have one to make. Should I make it before that one? Because I just want to
go for it. Go for it.
I hope it's not that long. I hope this one will be encouraging too, because we're talking about finding your gifting,
Mm-hmm.
And I just say the last few years have been probably some of the hardest years of my life. Just gone through some depression, just through it all. Part of it was that
mm-hmm.
trying to do something that wasn't me. Kind of sounds very individualistic, but
yeah,
what God has, shaped me for, it made me for, and coming to terms with it really, helped a great deal. Just realizing, okay, I don't have to do that. It can be different. And then also with just realizing I'm a church planner and I want to do these local church plants. It's actually helped me make connections with my family more. Because doing this local church plant, it's a family effort. It's not just me somewhere doing something, but it's connected to my family. And as I'm making these connections in the neighborhood, it's with my family. They're making friends with kids. My wife is, so it's much more mentally healthy, for my mental health.
Mm-hmm.
I'm more happy and more relaxed, because I don't know if that makes sense. I hope it's encouraging. This kind of thing,
yeah, it is.
It's better because you're not. I'm working. It's about working with my family. It's about working with community, making connections, and it's a lot more rewarding that way. So, okay, let's go to the next question.
Yeah. So here's the big one. Based on my previous interview with Dennis Janice and I read Dr. K.P. Johannen's book recently for a missions class that I'm doing with the seminary here.
Yeah.
And KP is an intense guy. I'm going to start off with that. He's a bit of a radical. And as Dennis Janice, Dr. Janice explained, and he knows KP
Okay.
personally. He explained that KP sees this as a life or death situation.
Yeah.
So that's why he's so radical in so many of the things he says. But if I remember correctly, there's a quote in his book, and this, I think this is a direct quote, something like, "The day of the Western missionary is over."
Mm-hmm.
So, and he's specifically speaking in the context of South Central Asia and that kind of thing. But he is strongly against Western missionaries coming in and planting churches instead of locals. In other words, he says that it's more advantageous, more effective, even financially effective, that the church planters themselves would be the boots on the ground, those pastors, those team members, and that kind of thing. And so my question for you would be, like, I think you're kind of an in-between case where you've already been in Ukraine for how many years? Like almost 30?
30,
Something.
yeah.
Yeah. And so, to say that you're this missionary that somebody sent over and that you're just coming, you're not that one. You're not that case. But what do you think of that idea of um, he's like, we have to get local people planting the churches, and then they will be the ones to then raise up other church planters, and then they will be the ones to raise up other church, that kind of thing. Like, I think that's what, when we're talking about the Calvary Chapel movement, one of the things that I see as another weakness is I don't see local pastors planting churches in the Calvary Chapel movement. In other movements, I see it. In our movement, I don't.
Yeah.
So throw that up in a big sticky ball and like pass it over to you and see what you do with that big question. So sorry. Yeah, like I said, I saved the worst one for last. So
I'd say both a yes and a no to him. I'd agree and not disagree. I agree that, and I think we've talked about it, that I think there's that problem, and we don't. I think, yeah, we don't see the church exploding like it should, like it did in Acts, like we see in China. And I think a lot of it is, I don't know if it's like necessarily because of foreign missionaries.
mm.
I would disagree on the fact that you never have Western missionaries come in. No,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I don't agree with that. I think that's very limited, but I agree with the principle that we need to be planning movements that are sustainable, that can keep on going. That don't require this, like the missionary always be there,
Yeah.
church planter or whatever. And also I think it's maybe a little bit. Well, it depends on your cultural setting too, but a little bit irrelevant because the world is becoming so international.
Mm-hmm.
And
especially where you are in Kyiv. Kyiv is that kind of city.
So things artificially say, "Oh, no foreign missionaries." Well, who's, like you're saying, even am I foreign or not? I don't know. Kind of in between. So I mean, it's a little bit limiting, I would say. I think it's a little bit, look at that way. It's not helpful, but it is. I think it is true. There's an issue there where, and I'm sad too about, or a little troubled that we're not seeing that movement in Ukraine, and
Mm-hmm.
I want to work with that. I think we need to be thinking about how to. We do have nationals, Ukrainians pastoring churches, but we haven't really seen it take off. And there's actually some kind of left ministry, for various reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And in part of it's training. I think part of it is also this more kind of church-centered, Sunday morning kind of
Yeah.
to what we're doing, instead of maybe being more looking at this cultural setting and how are we going to plant a church that's going to fit here and then also take off.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I don't know if that's.
Here's what I took it away from that book, if I may.
Yeah.
That like, I have to be thinking about the person that's going to take over for me is not going to be from America. Right. That's what I took away from it. Is that I'm not going to be expecting a graduate from Bible college to come over and be the next David
Yeah.
Sneed, you know. So
Right. And for me, I don't want to actually pastor. I don't want to pastor another church. I want to help. Actually, even plant churches. It's not like I'm going to plant this church and I'll plant that church. I want to. Right now, I'm planting, but partly is because I want to be part of a church planting movement with others.
amen. Yes.
So I don't really see myself. I hope to be more facilitating.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I have a good friend. He's my coach, and I think they did a wonderful job. I forgot the organization, but anyway, they're a church planting organization. So
Mm-hmm.
he planted they were actually supposed to come in Ukraine, but they ended up going to Moscow in late '80s, I think it was. I can't. But anyway, they ended up planting like 1,000 churches.
Oh wow!
In Russia, actually they ended up going to Kazakhstan. That was where they really kind of
wow.
A lot of influence. So there's, I forget the numbers, but it was crazy. All these Muslims came to Christ through a church planting movement.
Wow.
And he didn't plant one of them. I mean, personally,
wow.
And he was very hands-on. They came up with this kind of very innovational kind of way to plant the churches, though, because they were invited originally by people in the country, and they had their own idea of what it was going to look like. They're going to do like these seminars, and they're going to rent halls. They ended up doing this thing where they based their training in kitchens. Like they called it because the kitchen is like the center of the family, right?
Yeah.
So they ended up doing. They called it that, I think, something like the kitchen table, something or other. But so they would just go into these cities and they would get together these church planners basically, and they would go through the materials around a kitchen table, and then they would go out and help them. Like, okay, we're gonna do this prayer walk. Now we're gonna go do this outreach, and they would on the ground do it with them, but not all the then they would go somewhere else. And they would keep tabs, and help and support, pray. They didn't realize about prayer, by the way, so I think it's crucial.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, and it ended up facilitating over 1,000 church plants, and thousands and thousands of people coming to Christ. I mean, so that excited me. Like, whoa, that's me. That's what I want to do.
Yeah, that's what we want. This is what we want. Yes.
Yeah. So he's a church planning facilitator. That was what he was doing. Now he's he then got involved in city to city. He was a city to city coordinator over, I think it was Europe.
Mm-hmm.
Now he's back in the States and working on that end. But just a wonderful couple. Like he and his
Praise
wife.
the Lord.
What he did was just like, I want to do that. I want to be a facilitator. I don't want to be like but facilitating these movements. So I think it's about just not foreign or not foreign. Where's the best fit? Where we can help.
Oh, for sure.
With the greatest effect.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand, like in India and in Africa, I think there is that issue where if a white person starts a church, it can be distracting, or it can be like I mentioned, my friend, he from the get-go had a African pastor, and I think there's a reason for that, because in that culture, white person's like, they have loads of money and in their eyes.
Yeah, the skin says something. It does.
And there's dangers too. You can be noisily kidnapped because they're so valuable, right? So you kind of want to really get that indigenous as soon as possible.
Yeah.
So I think it just depends on but in Kiev, it's so international. It's like where we are right now, there's a lot of foreigners in this part of the community. That's one of the things we're thinking about. How can we reach the foreign community as well? So it's just more about looking at your context and what is strategic. Where can I bring the greatest good? Do this good. And I think empowering others is important. How can I empower others to do this, and not just, I'm doing this job and, till I die, but especially the church planner, it's like, how can I reproduce myself and like that? So.
And if you're doing that, if you're empowering others, then I think automatically it will turn indigenous, because the people around you that are joining the church, they're from that community, and so they'll, be empowered and then go out and plant their own churches, that type of thing. So it's gonna turn into that anyway. So.
Right. Yeah, and I hope we can change. Do something with the movement here and really help.
We'll keep praying through that. I personally want to be a part of that. Using the gifts that I have. Like one of the things that I'm working on for my church. You and I talked about this in the cafe in Pudzil a little while ago. These like lessons for exegetical preaching. And I'm finally like completely systematizing that, and I already put together like an intro video for my pastor, and you know, I've got like 13 lessons planned for our preaching team, and you know, we're finally getting into that, you know. So you know, I'm not the apostle type. I'm more of the prophet teacher type, you know. But you know, if there are ways that over here from Lviv we can, you know, help you guys over there in Kiev and across Ukraine, like, know that we're praying for you guys, with you guys, and we want to be a part of it. So
yeah, cool. Sounds awesome.
Yeah. So how can we pray for you guys in this ministry and everything as we come to a close?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we've made a lot of connections with people. Just would like to see now, you know, really some people making decisions to follow Christ. You know, they've heard, and I think a lot of them are intrigued by it. And there's one boy that you know, I'm discipling, but I'd like to see that take off, you know, and for our team, we're still trying to work that out, you know, bring it all together, where there's an understanding of what each person's doing. And so I guess that team, maybe continue the team building. And just, yeah, I guess then also at the same time, I want to connect with other people who are church planting. So I want to see help facilitate a church planting movement in Kiev that would, you know, of course, spill out in other places. But yeah, maybe those three things. And yeah, that as a family, we would also do well in discipling our boys and being an integral part of what we're doing. Yeah.
Alrighty. Discipling family. Can I pray for you now?
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Alrighty. God, thank you so much for George and for Sharon and for their family and for this budding church plant, Lord. I thank you for all the connections that they've made, and for this community, Podil, where you have, I'm trying to remember how I think Paul talked about it in Acts, where you have so many people there, Lord. I believe that there are many people there that are going to get saved through George and Sharon's ministry or the ministry that they do with other people. So I pray that you would bring those connections together so that people would be getting saved, Lord. And pray for the team that's coming together. Thank you, Lord, so much for the people that are willing to make the sacrifices to move, that want to, that are desiring to be together, that believe in this vision. I pray that you would guide them, provide for them. I pray for places for them to live, like George asked for prayer for. That you would provide the finances, the jobs for people to come together in this region of Kiev. And then I also pray for more relationships with other folks throughout Kiev and the rest of Ukraine that are church planting, that you would encourage George's heart and Sharon's heart as they're doing these things, that they're not alone, that there are other people that are going through this process as well. And I pray that they would just feed each other's fires with these things, Lord, that the church planters would be together and do these things. And I pray also for just the way that they're discipling their boys and their family, and that you would fill them with your spirit. I pray that peace, that joy, and your love would reign in their family, God. Thank you so much for them, because I already see that you're doing that. So in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. God bless you, brother. I really appreciate you spending the time with me, for giving up 2.5 hours of your afternoon to be a part of this thing again.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.